seeks recognition on this bill. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Look, we know that suicide attempts with firearms are far more fatal than attempts by any other
Talk closer to the
means.
mic.
Sorry. There we go. We know that suicide attempts with firearms are far more fatal than attempts by any other means. And according to recent data from the Giffords Law Center, about 63% of gun deaths in Pennsylvania are suicides, and approximately half of all suicide deaths in our Commonwealth involve firearms. Clearly, easy access to guns can be a determining factor in whether an at-risk person dies by their own hand. And suicide by gun is a particular issue for our veterans, where the combination of trauma and access to firearms is particularly deadly. So allowing people to voluntarily enroll themselves onto a do not sell list for firearms will go a long way towards helping individuals keep themselves, their loved ones, and their communities safe, should they be a danger to themselves or others due to mental health issues. In so many cases, suicide is preventable, and when people have the opportunity to get the help that they need to keep themselves from harm, the results can be life-saving. In states where laws like this have already been enacted, we've seen suicide prevention databases protect those who've enrolled themselves. And it's time we create a federal tool like this to help prevent suicide nationwide. I thank Congresswoman Jayapal for introducing this important bipartisan legislation, and to everyone who's worked in good faith to promote it. I look forward to passing this bill out of committee and urge all of my colleagues to support it. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
I am moved by the number of suicides we have in this country. The extent to which any weapon would be involved in that is terrifying and awful, and we should do a lot to try to prevent those suicides. But I guess what I'm wondering is, who exactly is this particular bill going to save? Because I can't imagine the circumstance where someone is at the end, at the bottom, believing that they had no choice but to take their own life. And the final thing that they thought that they needed to do was to go and fill out some government paperwork to put themselves onto a government database.
Would the gentleman yield?
Well, in just a moment, because I've observed, so as I was wondering who would really do this, and to what extent would that reduce the tens of thousands of suicides that we would certainly want to prevent. I did observe what had happened in the states that had passed these laws. And in Utah, I believe 5 people have enrolled. And in Washington State, though the gentlelady may correct me, I believe it's 13. So while tens of thousands of people die of suicide, there aren't yet tens of people in these 2 states that have self-enrolled in these programs. And so I think Mr. Massey's point, if there were to be any mistake, any circumstance where someone was then deprived of the ability to defend themselves, I could certainly see that being just as likely as this sort of virtue signal of a piece of legislation actually resulting in that outcome. I'd yield to the gentlelady.
Thank you. Representative Gaetz, the answer to your question is you actually enroll in the program at any time, not when you're in the depths of your last sort of throes and you're contemplating suicide in that moment. But people who have mental health illness have enrolled in the program, and it has then saved their life at the time when they are having tremendous swings or challenges and they suddenly seek the gun. And so that's what Katrina's mom would have done.
Is my data correct? In Washington State, is it only 13 people?
It's 25 in Washington, and the programs are brand new. But I guess I would ask you, Mr. Gaetz, how many people do you think it's worth saving? I mean, do you think one life is worth saving? Do you think 13 are, 25? Does it have to be 8,000 to be worthwhile?
I would suggest that the risk has to be balanced against the risk that somebody could be in a worse situation regarding their own safety. And, the notion that we sort of begin these debates with a pronouncement of the tens of thousands of people that we're going to save, and then I'm not entirely sure that the 25 people in Washington State were saved. I mean, I'm also trying to envision the circumstance you described where someone thinks, well, I might one day get to a point where I would engage in self-harm, and the thing that I'm going to do between now and that moment is to go and enroll myself in a government database and to fill out government paperwork. that just does not connect to me. It would seem more likely to me that these 25 people who did this sort of did it as a form of self-therapy, and there would be a lot of other ways to do that without expanding government databases that give a lot of us.
Mr. Gaetz, will you yield for?
Sure.
So I think the example,
It's her time.
I think it is not uncommon for people who might be struggling with substance abuse or some other addiction or other mental health challenges to have moments in which they recognize that they are in a difficult space. And in that moment, they have control over where that firearm is, but they recognize that things are getting worse for them and they need a safe place to put that firearm. And it's, mental health is not linear. People have good and bad days, challenging moments, times of losses. So this would allow people just to have their own.
Why wouldn't they just like lock it up or like get rid of it or like don't go buy the gun?
Because they may get access to it. They may think the safest way is to be sure that it's out of their possession. And why not give them that tool to help save their lives?
To go, I guess I don't believe that the people that would be susceptible to that ultimate outcome would be the people filling out government paperwork to deprive themselves of their own rights. I mean, Mr.
Would the
Chairman,
gentleman yield?
Sir.
I would point out that your problem, Mr. Gaetz, is that you are completely sane.
Well,
Not everybody.
I'm rarely accused.
Not everybody is all the time, and this bill is intended to help people who may not be all the time.
Yeah, I would
Would the gentleman yield?
I would suggest that the path to sanity and the path to better mental health rarely goes through filling out more government paperwork and enrolling
Would the
yourself
gentleman
on
yield?
a government database. I will yield.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that the University of Alabama has a letter that I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record, and it is specifically looking at when a program like this is used, and it did a significant amount of research, and it looked and said that this is a program that, based on this data that they have, of 46% of patients at high risk of suicide at the University of Alabama Medical Center who would enroll in the system if available, it would save about 12,000 American lives every year.
Yeah, I would likely question that, but I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks recognition? For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
And actually, I think I just want to ask a question of Ms. Jayapal if she'll answer it. And so I'd offer to yield to answer this. So you said, I think that Washington's done this, Utah's done it. Why can't it be left to states to decide whether to do it?
Yeah, this was something that we talked about again and again. We are constantly looking for opportunities to take proven programs in other states that work. And when Representative Curtis and I started talking about this, what we realized is that this is something that really should be expanded across the country because so many states don't have this right now. This is a voluntary program. You can get into it and out of it as quickly as possible. And so I think that it wasn't an easy road to implementation in these states because we had to take each one at a time because the burden of setting up the brand new infrastructure to support this type of system. And I think that I've heard from other states that have not been able to make progress yet that this would really help them to be able to quickly institute it in their states and get it going and help save lives immediately.
Yeah, just to follow that up, I mean, if they've run into problems in their states doing it, it might also be some people have some of the opposition or reasons for concern that Mr. Massey said. So why make that choice for the citizens of Kentucky? Why not leave it to the citizens of Kentucky through their legislators to decide whether it's a wise choice or not?
I'm happy to give you my answer to that if you're asking.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, look, it would be like reinventing the wheel 50 times. We are constantly looking for programs that are proven and successful. And often on this committee, when we talk about things, you say, oh, it's not proven. Well, here's one that is proven, not just in a blue state, but in a red state, endorsed by the Shooting Council, endorsed by Republican legislators. Why can't we do it here? Why can't we implement this here and help cut through a lot of that implementation process issues that states have just because there's a lot on their table when we know that there's something that works?
I thank the gentlelady. And I guess, I know your question was posed rhetorically, but I'll take up to try to answer it. It seems to me that that's exactly why we have this this, what is it, what is the justice referred to it as? The experiment or the laboratory of democracy, the several states who get to make different policy decisions based on the predilections and views of their own citizens. And I don't know that every time you come up with something that, in fact, if something is a good model and works well and the idea sells itself, it will be emulated in other states. And it seems, I'm very troubled that we would enact a provision that has the federal government. I'm trying to think what part of the federal government's enumerated responsibilities it falls under to invite citizens to surrender their constitutional rights. I knew that we do it. I was thinking through that. We do it it's interesting to me. I was thinking through Miranda versus Arizona. We do allow people to surrender their constitutional rights as criminally accused or being investigated. But we, over time, the Supreme Court has said that's something that ought to be done very cautiously. And consequently, the Supreme Court imposed on law enforcement across the country the responsibility to give warnings designed to ensure that the person involved was not doing that.
Would the gentleman yield?
Mr. Bishop, I'm happy to answer your question if you'll yield.
Well, let me see. I got about 5 requests, and I think just for the time being available to keep it balanced, I heard Mr. Gaetz behind me, so I'll yield to him first.
Just briefly, Mr. Bishop, is perhaps one of the reasons why other states may not have copied this program is that there are more states than there are human beings that have ever enrolled in one of these programs. Would that perhaps be a demonstrative of efficacy?
I think you make a point, Mr. Gaetz, and I would. Did you ask me, Mr. Massey? I yield to Mr.
Well, to your point, Mr. Bishop, now that I look at this, I'm concerned about the constitutionality of this and whether it would withstand a challenge in the Supreme Court if somebody couldn't get their gun after their name had entered onto this database, because the Gun-Free School Zone Act was struck down by the Supreme Court because there was no interstate nexus. And so Congress passed it again and said only for guns that have traveled in interstate commerce. So without that phrase in here, I'm afraid it is on its face unconstitutional.
I would be thrilled to continue yielding, but my time has been exhausted.
Time has indeed been exhausted. Who else?